Hi, we're talking about Your Money Matters on NDTV Profit, and my name is Alex Matthew. If there's one thing that causes quite a bit of division in the personal finance and investing circles, it is the National Pension Scheme. Should you invest in it? Should you not? There are proponents and there are those that argue very vehemently against it. And one of the reasons why these people argue against it is the lock-in that forces you to stay invested till you are 60 years of age. Now, nobody is denying that this is a great product. A large part of what you generate over the course of the investment cycle is tax-free. And it actually has derived quite a bit of returns depending on which scheme you invested in over the course of the last 5 years. The question we're asking today is that, is it the right moment now? Is it ripe for the NPS to have an overhaul? And joining me to talk about this is Sharad Tandon, the founder of Invest at Ease, as well as Vivek Rege, the founder and chief executive officer of VR Wealth Advisors. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for taking the time. Sharad, I don't know if, and I'll start with you. I don't know if I remember correctly, but I think I remember that you are a proponent of the NPS. Am I right? And if so, yes. Can you tell me about what you think about a few of the things that I said? One, that lock-in, and a few other things that we could change.
Okay, so why I'm proponent of the NPS and advise everyone to be there, whether it's a freelance or a salaried individual, is very simply. In a portfolio, when you're creating, there are certain money portion which is for long term, and NPS forms into that bracket. It's the lowest cost in terms of any equity schemes managed across country. Now, return wise, if you want to compare last 10-year returns, the top 10 schemes have given 19% plus on the equity side. On the debt side, they've given in the range of 8 to 10%, which is as good as any other mutual fund investments. Now, as you rightly pointed out, to some extent, drawback is in terms of lock-in. Now, that lock-in is till the age of you retire, which is 60 odd years. Now, as I started with, some portion of your kitty has to be for long term, and please ensure this is part of that. Now, second drawback of this product is when you withdraw the NPS post-retirement, you will be actually asked to take an annuity up to the extent of 40% of the corpus. Now, in my opinion, it's not a negative feature. It's a very positive feature. Now, when I'm retiring, most of us will probably want to hang our boots and not worry about our portfolio day in, day out, and will want to have a steady income also to some extent. Now, this annuity, though taxable, will be that steady income for you. And that's why we are in favor of everyone having exposure to the NPS to the extent possible.
So you've enumerated a few of the drawbacks. Vivek, I'm curious about what you think about the NPS. First, do you advise that people invest in it? And what, according to you, are the drawbacks? We've already spoken about that retirement age, which is 60, and where you can first have access to it, and the fact that you have to have 40% in annuity.
So the other drawback is...
the question was for Vivek.
Sorry.
Yeah. So Alex, great question. I think a lot of debate, keeps happening around this. You see, in principle, I think NPS, seems to be a product which is firstly for people who may not have, the social security system. Okay. And so we have to understand from their end is that, in most of the financial life stage, which, forces you to spend on certain goals, okay, and these goals come much ahead of your retirement, you might end up having no money left actually when you retire, okay, because you give preference or prioritize things which are important for the family, and then you are the last person who will have to then figure out whether you have enough money left. So in principle, if you look at the overall social security, safety net in the country, it is pretty low. And therefore, it is very important to have a NPS sort of a product which essentially makes sure that ultimately you have your own money to consume, because most of the other goals would have taken precedence by then.
I'm not discounting that. Sorry to interrupt, but what my question is, let's talk about the drawbacks, because ultimately I want people to talk about things that could potentially change, and ultimately change is the only constant in life or otherwise. So therefore what we're attempting to do is to suggest ways in which this product can be improved, so the drawbacks that people highlight can perhaps be fixed. So Vivek, the 2 points that we've raised, one is the requirement to only have access to it at 60, and the second is that 40% annuity compulsory investment. Is there anything else that stands out to you as a drawback?
I think these are two very well-known drawbacks. Okay, essentially from a point of view of liquidity, and if we have to change something, if the whole point in terms of having the annuity percentage being lowered to an extent of about 20% will be much better, because that gives a kind of a leeway to a person who is really looking at lump sum to be withdrawn at a time when the retirement age or the superannuation age comes into force. So I believe it is more the liquidity front where maybe some tweaks can be done. There is always a room to do that. However, at an overall level, it seems to be a reasonably good product.
Reasonably good. Just to follow up, you mentioned that this is particularly for those who don't have social security. So my understanding of that is a non-employee, somebody who's earning, that is not employed by a company and therefore does not have a contribution to the employee provident fund. Is that the right understanding?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, Alex.
Okay, therefore, Sharad, I'm coming to you in the next one, right? Because ultimately the comparisons that are drawn are between the NPS and the EPF, as I mentioned, and there's also the voluntary provident fund. But one thing that has changed in the recent past, in this financial year, has to do with the new tax regime, which ultimately now for most people has become the default regime, not because of a choice, but because of the fact that it's much better tax-wise, implication-wise. So if you are choosing the new tax regime, you are no longer getting the benefit of the employee provident fund to the extent of your contributions. So therefore, is there a stronger argument to make a bigger contribution to the NPS?
Okay, so Alex, the three products you referred to, NPS, EPF, and VPF. So VPF is a part of EPF itself, where employees voluntarily deposit additional into the EPF, and the returns are same 8.5%, which depending on which year markets have gone. While NPS, on the other hand, is a market-linked product. So you rightly put together, if the tax regimes of that is taken up, the better part of NPS is, so you can break into two sort of segments for the clients. One is the employed, which is the people like, say, people working in NDTV Profit. They have their EPF going in. Can they ask their employer to have a deduction, and which is possible up to 10 to 15% of their basic contribution going into the NPS, not exceeding 7.5 lakhs, and that becomes tax-free income. So for that is the additional advantage with low-cost product. While people like, say, for Vivek and me who are working on their own, and more people who are doing the gigs works as this economy is growing, the NPS contribution, I always suggest, whether with tax exemption or with no exemption, is a low-cost product. Please park at least 10 to 25% of your investable kitty in that portion to compound well. And I'll give you a simple example. Just compare it to a mutual fund which was launched by UTI, I think, in sometime in 2015-16, and they had a courageous call then. They launched a equity-linked savings schemes with a 10-year lock-in. And it's not completed, it's still 10 years. The money has compounded 3 times. Now, if that sort of return, which is like 18-19%, coming in the last 10 years in NPS, any allocation there will compound to that level. And simply to put together in 10 years at 19% annualized, you are going 2.8 times, 2.9 times of your investment amount in SIPs. I'm not even talking about lump sum. If you do lump sum, then probably 5 times. And that makes NPS a very strong project, whether you consider tax regime advantage, no advantage. For me, the incidence of tax is post facto. It's not pre facto.
Yeah, that's a fair point to make. Okay, so you mentioned ELS, and of course it's not necessarily directly comparable, but the point is well made. So from that perspective, Vivek, do you think that the various combinations that are offered in the NPS, which is your aggressive and your conservative option and your balanced option, and also the default setting, do you think that this is enough of a range? Or do you think a full maneuverability or full equity, if at all, is something that should be given as an option for those that are investing for the very long term? And here we're talking to people who are in their mid-20s and starting out their careers and who have possibly 30 years where they can contribute to the NPS.
No, you have made an excellent point, Alex. I think it is very important to give choice to people because, see, finally, at the end of the day, we have to understand that NPS is a market linked product and the time horizon makes a lot of difference. In the way the money needs to be deployed and allocated in the NPS, the options which are available. The younger the person, the earlier the person starts, the more the runway is left for the person to really make the most out of from the market link products. And therefore it is very important to have at least a certain age till which the equity should be given to the extent of 100%. Of course, I continue to maintain that it is very important to understand the risk profile of that person. Okay, so it is very important to do some due diligence before the person invests into NPS. However, a forced cap on equity may not necessarily be a very good idea, especially when you have time by your side.
Yeah, flexibility is something that you should look for. Okay, and in your opinion, Sharad has already given, Sharad, what was the percentage between 10 and 25%, is it?
Yes, that's the sort of allocation we look to get into our client's portfolio in NPS.
I will circle back to you on what the selection of type of scheme should be. But Vivek, I want to come to you on whether or not you think this 10 to 25% is appropriate. Do you agree with that?
I do agree with that, Alex. I completely agree with what Sharad said. It is very important to have a kitty which doesn't come to you at one stroke. Okay. I think the problem at the time of retirement is the problem of liquidity. You might at times you might have liquidity from all fronts coming at one point of time. Therefore, it is very important to of course in NPS you can always defer and you can kind of continue. However, at a broad level, it is good to have at least 10 to 20% into NPS as an allocation in your retirement plan itself, because you are actually in a way ensuring that that product is behaving or has certain characteristics which are a bit different from your active portfolio management, which you actually do, on which you have a full control, right? So I think from that angle, it is a very good idea to have a up to 20% allocation to NPS.
Got it. Okay, Sharad, a quick answer here. Where we've got another 5 minutes to talk about this, so I want to run through a few things. Depending on your life cycle, I guess it would change the approach to which NPS you want to select, right? Or which mode of investment you want to select. You want to run through the examples?
So, Alex, the way we look at it is very simply. For NPS, the larger the equity portion makes more sense, because the 75% which we are managing actively, there it's easy to manage your debt and the mid-cap, small cap allocation. In NPS, our simple suggestion to client without complication is look at the aggressive equity portfolio, and that's how it will compound. And anyhow, that takes care with the age, with the reduction of the equity allocation there itself, rather than looking at a balance or a debt portfolio in the NPS. Now, one additional point which probably we discussed in past, and we have been talking it as a negative connotation of the feature in NPS is taxability of the annuity. Now, assume a situation like this year onwards, where 12 lakhs is your threshold level where it becomes taxable income on annuity, assuming there is no other income. For that threshold to be crossed, your annuity buying portion should be at least around 1.5 crore for it to cross the annuity threshold to become taxable. This, of course, is assumption you don't have any other income coming through. Now, that is a huge corpus, 1.5 crores, 40% of your total retirement cage, which says 6 to 7 crores. I'm sure a lot of us in India don't have that sort of kitty in today's world also.
Yeah, important point to make. A quick question to you, Vivek. You say that liquidity is something to solve for when you're talking about NPS. The option exists now, and this is changes in the not too distant past, where you can defer the redemption of your NPS all the way to, correct me if I'm wrong, 70 is 70 the age, or can you even go beyond that? Should you exercise that?
75.
75, okay. Vivek, so should you exercise that ability to defer your redemption?
You can. It really depends on what exactly at what point you are. See, there is always a need to have a stable income which comes to you, because assuming that you actually stop working, correct? You expect the money to come every month to you. Now, just imagine is that most of your other stuff is going to be kind of, let's say, something which you will have to book profit and consume, right? So there is a decision to be made. Every time you have to consume something, there is a decision to be made. So from an NPS standpoint, if you really look at it, it also solves the problem of taking decisions every time. Okay, active decision making may not be forte for everyone. Every individual person with a spouse may not necessarily be equipped to take a decision so actively every time in terms of how and when a person should really book profits. So
Important.
in that case, it is very important to look at the product from a very different lens,
Sure,
which
sure.
gives you the option of a stable income.
Got it. Okay, important. And also the ability to defer that 60%, which is tax-free, the ability to compound for longer is certainly beneficial. You can keep it for 10, 15 years longer. Couple more points that I want you to make very quickly. Sharad, I'm coming to you. Public Provident Fund. The question is it still relevant given that one of those E's is out of the window with the new tax regime? So if you were to put a certain amount of money and you already have a PPF, should you put that extra amount in the NPS instead of that and keep the minimum amount invested in PPF?
So there are a few factors which will impact that decision making. One is, of course, one option of NPS increasing to 75, and you also have it together with SWP option post 60. You can withdraw partially like your mutual funds. Now, PPF is a very good product if you're looking at purely from the allocation of a debt allocation. And EEE still stands. The only question is it's not giving you tax rebate while investing. It's not anymore part of ATC. It's probably the only tax-free instrument left today, together with the 10% additional contribution from to NPS from the employer side as a total EEE product. So for my suggestion, debt allocation PPF, it compounds 8.5% that comes annually. And it gives you liquidity. After 3-5 years, you can partially withdraw, you can take a loan against PPF. It serves all your purpose in case of emergency also.
Keep the PPF. Keep the PPF is the view. My understanding was that one of the E's goes because that one E, the first E is the rebate that you're getting. So there's 2 E's left. But then we can debate that at a later date. The last point, and that's to you, Vivek. Should you do a VPS or an NPS in your opinion?
So this question will arise only if you are, employed.
Correct.
But you are employed. I don't think many people have that luxury of being employed, and therefore.
What are you saying?
Therefore. No, so this is a gig economy. Not everyone will be in a formal system.
Sure. Okay, point taken.
And therefore I think NPS plays a very, very, very different role from that standpoint. But however, I think assuming that you are working somewhere and you have a choice to do VPF and NPS, I would definitely go for NPS because it gives you a market-linked growth versus a VPF will give you a very stable fixed growth, which is also based on the government of India of what interest it really wants to pay. So therefore, I think rather than being dependent on the government, okay, it is very good to actually venture out and actually allocate the money through an NPS route, that is far, far better. And of course, because you are also having the ability to contribute 14% of your basic, which also helps you to kind of go into that E1, which is the exemption at a first level itself under the new regime. As Sharad also rightly said, it makes a huge sense to have an NPS, even if you have a VPF option, in my view.
Fantastic. So we've spoken about the drawbacks, but ultimately for me, the takeaway is that despite the drawbacks as they stand right now, the NPS is actually a great product for you to take on board, and hopefully some of those drawbacks dissipate over the course of the next several years when people start investing in the NPS now. Sharad, Vivek, thanks so much for taking the time and for speaking to me on Your Money Matters.